The SEC is going out of their way to pick a lot of fights right now, and they've messed up because the one they're trying to pick with Mark Mitchell in Kentucky basketball is the wrong one to fight right now.
You are Locked On Kentucky, your daily podcast on the Kentucky Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I don't know if that intro made any sort of sense at all, but we're going to try and unpack the insane story that is Mark Mitchell and his fight for eligibility today. What's going on, Big Blue Nation? Welcome on into Locked On Kentucky, your daily Kentucky Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Lance Dawe, and today's episode of the show, we're going to get to a couple of voicemail questions you guys left on the Locked On Kentucky hotline. Going to do my best to answer those two cues. Also going to talk about how Kentucky should fight what's going on with the SEC and the NCAA right now, but don't be stupid about it. But first, we do need to identify the fact that the SEC and Greg Sankey, they're picking the wrong fight right now with Mark Mitchell and the Kentucky Wildcats. I'll explain what I mean in a second. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Join all of the action at FanDuel.com to play daily dingers and make your free pick on who's hitting a homer this MLB season. Thank you guys so much for making Locked On Kentucky your first listen every single day, whether you are listening on podcast or watching live here on YouTube. Really appreciate you watching the show. Again, please subscribe wherever you guys are tuned in. You can join the Locked On Kentucky hotline. 859-359-6362 is the number to dial if you want to join up. Can't take calls live, but if you want to leave a question for the show in the voicemail box, I would love for you to do so. 859-359-6362 number to dial if you want to leave a voicemail in the inbox there. We'll try and answer the question on the show. We've got two coming later today. The SEC is picking the wrong fight with Mark Mitchell right now. And the SEC is completely within its right to have an intraconference transfer rule. They're within their right to sit here and tell us that they can apply that rule and they can do whatever they want. That's fine. But applying that rule to Mark Mitchell, transfer from Missouri that's now trying to come play at Kentucky, is ridiculous. This is not a player who looked at Missouri in April, decided that he might want to go somewhere else, intentionally sat out the portal window in April, and then tried to sneak into Kentucky 4 months later. Mark Mitchell did not enter the portal in April because Mark Mitchell had no college eligibility. That is the entire argument. And what the SEC is trying to stand on right now is ridiculous. Somehow, Mitchell was able to clear one eligibility hurdle and immediately find another problem here. The good news is, as we stated yesterday, NBA Summer League stuff is not a problem anymore. The bad news here is that Greg Sankey and the SEC have apparently found a new way to completely, potentially, keep Mark Mitchell from playing for Kentucky. So obviously Mitchell received protection from Judge Brian Edwards on August 21st. That order protected his fifth season, ordered the NCAA to give him access to the portal, and even included protections concerning missed transfer windows and professional participation. That's what the Lexington Herald Leader reported yesterday. Ben Roberts, I'm not calling him wrong because everything within that court-mandated temporary restraining order implied that Mark Mitchell was okay to go, barring a stay from the NCAA and some sort of appeal in this ruling here in Louisville. The SEC then clarified their professional athlete policy. Mitchell is not the target there. CBS reports that the SEC's professional restrictions did not apply to Mitchell's situation and that he chose not to sign the Denver Exhibit 10 contract. We talked about this on yesterday's show, so we sat here and thought, great, we're done. Awesome. We just got to see if the NCAA actually does try and stay in this lawsuit in Louisville or if they eventually somehow do what they need to do and just give up. But no, we're not done because flying right in here is the SEC transfer rule, right? The SEC has a separate rule, obviously, like we talked about yesterday, saying that if you're transferring from one SEC school to another SEC school, you have to enter the portal during your sport's first regular transfer window. We talked about this yesterday. For basketball, Mitchell needed to be in the April window. He wasn't, so according to CBS Sports, the SEC met this week and reaffirmed that it intends to enforce that rule. So regardless of what Ben Roberts and the Lexington Herald Leader had to say yesterday about this TRO granting Mitchell relief here from having to have entered the portal in April to meet the SEC's demands here. Turns out that's not true. And the SEC is going to fight this every step of the way. Matt Norlander reported this. I think a couple other people reported this, that the SEC intends to, like they spelled it out, intends to fight Mark Mitchell in Kentucky on this until they want to die in court on this. And so that's my biggest question here. For the SEC, for Sankey, for anybody else there, what was Mitchell supposed to do in April? What was he supposed to do? Enter the transfer portal for what? For what? His fifth season, again, it did not exist at this point. As far as the NCAA was concerned, his college career was over. How many times do we need to keep having this stupid conversation on this show? He played 4 seasons, and he was moving forward towards professional basketball. Players before him got a 5th year. Players after him will get a 5th year. He is getting screwed. It's the reason why these lawsuits are getting TROs in the first place. It makes no sense. NCAA's new 5-for-5 policy, again, wasn't adopted until late June, which is moronic, in my opinion, that they waited so long after the portal window had already closed. And this is what triggered all of this litigation bull, right? Is that the NCAA could not get its stuff together, and now the SEC, underneath the governing body of the NCAA, can't get its stuff together either, and they want to die on this hill. Again, this is the wrong fight to pick, because essentially you're telling Mitchell you should have entered the portal in April. Again, why? Why? Because, well, SEC saying you might eventually get another year, but I don't have another year. Mitchell says in this case, well, you should have anticipated that you'd sue us, win an injunction, and become eligible again. That is bull crap. And this is where I get more frustrated with Sankey and the SEC, because I understand the purpose of the SEC rule. You don't want Georgia, Kentucky, Alabama, Florida, whoever, what have you, circumventing the transfer portal calendar and poaching other conference members' rosters in July or August. That's fine. I get that. I understand why the rule is here. But rules have exceptions because circumstances have exceptions. And this is what the court case, if Kentucky does want to take this back to court, which they probably will, this is why this is still unfolding, and Kentucky is going to fight this, and why the SEC's picked the wrong fight here. This isn't Kentucky tampering with Missouri's active roster. Mitchell's Missouri career was finished. It was done. We're not poaching anybody. He pursued professional basketball. Then the entire eligibility landscape around him and all these other plaintiffs and all these other lawsuits changed underneath them at a moment's notice in June, which is why they're suing in the first place. And a judge specifically gave Mark Mitchell another opportunity to play college basketball and ordered that the portal was open to him. And now the SEC is sitting here telling you effectively, you can play college basketball again. You just can't transfer to Kentucky because you failed to use a portal window when you weren't eligible to play college basketball. That makes
no sense.
It makes no sense. And frankly, I don't even know whose competitive interests the SEC is supposedly protecting here. Is it Missouri? Because again, Mitchell is not on the Missouri Tigers 2026-2027 roster. He wasn't planning to be with the Tigers. The Missouri wasn't planning on having him back. They moved on. So had he. Who are you protecting here? What competitive advantage is Kentucky exploiting here by adding Mark Mitchell? I'll go a step further. What competitive advantage is Tennessee exploiting by adding Jalen Washington, or Florida adding Denzel Aberdeen? Right? They're taking a player who was considered finished with college basketball, who received court protection for another season, and who became available in August. And then again, we get back to the penalties, which I just think are asinine here. And this is the part that should make you, the Kentucky fan, angry, in my opinion. Again, if Kentucky tells the SEC we're playing Mark Mitchell anyway, the punishment from King Greg Sankey, dictator Greg Sankey, includes, reiterate this for those of you that didn't watch the show yesterday, a half-season suspension for Mark Pope. Stupid. The craziest thing here, a fine equal to 50% of Kentucky basketball's annual operating budget. You have got to be kidding me. A loss of Kentucky's SEC voting privileges. They want to take away the voting rights of this university, and potentially additional punishment, subject to the whim and fancy of King Greg Sankey. Oh, we must worship at the feet of Greg Sankey in anything he decides. The SEC could also pursue federal litigation as well. That's not a slap on the wrist. That's a little bit more serious. That's a conference deciding to throw a nuclear bomb here or trying to deter things from happening in the first place. The SEC is so far beyond wrong here. And again, I'm not just advocating for Mitchell. I'm advocating for the other instances in this conference, Washington, Aberdeen, whatever other players are trying to transfer here. This is ridiculous. Not because conferences shouldn't control intraconference transfers. Write down in my notes, not because Kentucky deserves some special exemption because they're Kentucky and they're the best program in this conference. Argue with the wall on that. Because, historically speaking, because you cannot reasonably punish somebody for failing to meet a deadline before they had the legal ability or practical reason to participate in the process. That's what I wrote down. Again, give the exception an extremely narrow definition. Court restores eligibility after the normal portal window closes. Athletes get a short transfer window. You're done. Cool. You're not opening here, Greg Sankey, unlimited free agency on college football and college basketball. Definitely not a week before the freaking season starts for college football. You have got to be kidding me. You're not destroying the SEC by letting Mark Mitchell play. You're recognizing an extraordinarily unusual circumstance that disappears after this year anyway. Not probably, does disappear after this year anyway. And the irony, what is gold, is that the SEC keeps talking about the stability, right? And how important that is, while creating another lawsuit out of something that could have been solved with just a little common sense, just thinking about it for a little bit. Same for you, NCAA. If you want to talk about stability for this conference and the future of college athletics, you are actively making things worse. You're muddying this all up for no reason. You are dying on a hill that does not need to have bloodshed on it. This is so stupid. The NCAA created all this mess. A Kentucky judge created a temporary solution here. And now the SEC has said, you know what? Let's jump on top of this. I got another mess to throw on top of all of this. It's throwing gas on the fire. Gas on the fire. Kentucky should fight this. I expect them to. But I don't think that they need to be stupid in the way that they go about this. Like, they have to be careful. You have to be careful in the way you go about this. You can't just sit there and say, yeah, screw Greg Sankey if you're the University of Kentucky, and then go after it. You got to be careful. We'll talk about why and how they should go about this here in just a little bit. First, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at Indeed Sponsored Jobs. When workplace chaos hits and you need to make the right hire, Indeed Sponsored Jobs helps connect employers with candidates who match specific needs like skills, certifications, and location. Less time gets spent searching. More time gets spent finding the right fit. People are finding quality hires on Indeed right now. Maybe the SEC should go looking over there for a new commissioner. In the minute or so that I'll talk to you about Indeed, companies like yours have made 27 hires on Indeed already in that minute, according to Indeed data worldwide. Absolutely insane. And you can spend less time searching, more time actually interviewing candidates who check all of your boxes, less stress, less time, more results for you. When you need the right person to cut through the chaos, it's a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to help get your job the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. Just go to Indeed.com/podcast right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Again, that's Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. If you need to make a hire, it's a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs. All right, continuing along here on today's episode of the show, we are 14 minutes in. Goodness gracious. It's getting real. Isn't it fun? Isn't it fun, guys? Kentucky should fight this, but they can't do anything stupid. I got 12 pages of notes on this today, by the way. In case you guys are wondering, why does it keep looking down? So that I don't lose my train of thought. This is now like the 5th episode in a row where I've just had stacks on stacks on stacks of not scripting everything I want to say, but bullet points, because to keep up with all this and make sure I don't say the wrong thing. Here's where this gets fascinating for Kentucky, if it's not already. Because Mark Mitchell's lawyers didn't just shrug their shoulders today and say, well, conference rules are conference rules, I guess. Guess we just gotta
go on back and give up.
They went right back to Judge Brian Edwards earlier today on Thursday. Attorneys in the Kentucky case filed new motions, arguing that the SEC's restrictions are attempting to circumvent Edwards' August 21st order, saying, hey, this is in contempt of court. They are now asking Edwards to clarify that his injunction applies not only to the NCAA, but also to entities acting, quote, in concert or participation with the NCAA, and their argument is that the SEC qualifies here. They've gone far enough to submit a proposed order asking Edwards to make the NCAA explain why it should not be held in contempt because of the SEC's actions. Very important distinction. The NCAA has not been held in contempt yet. Edwards has not ruled that the SEC is bound by his injunction. Those are things that Mitchell's attorneys are requesting, right? And a hearing is scheduled for Monday with Judge Brian Edwards at 10:45 a.m. per WDRB. You can go find that article online if you would like to. I tweeted it out earlier today. I find it hilarious that Ryan Downton and whatever attorneys, other attorneys are involved in this lawsuit with these plaintiffs aren't taking the SEC to court. They're going back to this lawsuit and saying, no. If the governing body of college athletics, the NCAA, can't get their conference members to get their stuff together in compliance with your TRO, Judge Brian Edwards, then the NCAA is in contempt of court. Not the SEC per se, but the NCAA. I find that very funny that the NCAA is like getting up out of the mud just a little bit to take a breath, and then these lawyers are just like, nope. Right back into it, brother. Now, will they win this? I don't know. I just find it hilarious that we're not dragging the SEC into this just yet. We're looking at the NCAA and saying, this is still your fault. And you're in contempt of court because you can't get your conferences to actually act in line. I find that very entertaining. You may say, well, how could they possibly connect Sankey and the NCAA? I mean, the SEC is operating independently in some respects to the NCAA, especially in regard to this. They are their own conference. They can make their own rules. Here's the fun little legal nugget that you can snack on. Earlier in the litigation, Greg Sankey and other conference commissioners submitted a declaration supporting the NCAA's position. Do you guys remember this? We did a couple episodes on this, actually, where Greg Sankey and these other conference commissioners asked Judge Brian Edwards, hey, don't rule in favor of these players. That declaration said conference representatives had been, quote, heavily involved in developing the NCAA's new eligibility model. Turns out you are involved, and you wrote it down for all of us to see. Mitchell's attorneys are now going to use that against them. This is essentially what I've wrote down. You guys told the court yourselves that you work closely together developing this new policy. Now the NCAA has been enjoined, and suddenly the SEC is stepping in with new rules that produce essentially the same result? No, sir. That's in contempt of court, contempt of the ruling that Judge Brian Edwards has thrown out there. Can't get away with that, bucko. Yeah, they got to change the rule, or you're going to be in big trouble. That's the theory. Theoretically, Kentucky civil procedure can, under certain circumstances, make an injunction applicable to non-parties who are acting in concert with the party that's actually been enjoined. The SEC isn't currently a defendant, again, like I mentioned, so Edwards has to determine whether or not that principle actually reaches the conference here, and so that Monday hearing is going to be big. That Monday hearing is going to be huge. So if I'm Kentucky sitting here, you fight this all the way until somebody with actual authority tells you that you've lost. Again, you recruited Mitchell knowing that there would be legal complications. You got into this knowing that you were going to have to tussle in the mud a little bit. Mark Pope was going to have to get that suit dirty one way or another. You accepted his commitment. You presumably have a compensation agreement. Something's been arranged. He's enrolled or going through whatever academic steps are necessary. You have publicly made him a part of the team, and he's good enough that he materially changes your ceiling. We're not talking about your 13th scholarship or the third guy in the power forward rotation. You're talking about 18 freaking points per game in this conference already. He could arguably be Kentucky's most important player this season. So, yes, the University of Kentucky should have their lawyers involved on this. Yes, Kentucky should challenge the SEC's interpretation. Yes, Kentucky should support Mitchell's efforts to get Edwards to clarify the injunction. My opinion. But here's where you slow down on the screw Sankey stuff, like play him anyway crowd. You can't do that, at least not yet. because there's a massive difference between fighting the SEC legally and sending Mitchell onto the floor while the SEC is explicitly telling you he's prohibited. Because again, if you lose, go back over it. Mark Pope potentially loses half the season. Kentucky potentially gets hit with a gigantic financial penalty. And now you've created a fun little institutional war between Kentucky and its own conference. That's not where you want to be. There is zero reason for you to go kamikaze in August if you're the SEC. You got to go win, or excuse me, Kentucky. You got to go win the legal argument first here. And if Edwards rules on Monday that the SEC is acting in concert with the NCAA and therefore can't enforce the restrictions that they've tried to place on Mitchell, then we're cooking. We're cooking with a little gas. Later tonight, I'm going to make some hash browns and eggs and bacon for breakfast for dinner, and we're going to be cooking just alongside Judge Brian Edwards on the SEC. The SEC then has to decide whether it wants to appeal, seek a stay, sue separately, or give up, which is what they should have done a week and a half ago. That's a much stronger position for Kentucky to be in than simply daring Greg Sankey to punish them. I'd rather be in that spot than just figure out what a dictator Greg Sankey wants to do to my university because he got mad that Mark Mitchell wants to play another year. Boo freaking who? Cry me a river. I almost said something really inappropriate. Here's the part that should keep Kentucky fans from assuming that this is over. So for everybody in the live chat that you think, this is going to end well, it'll be fine, whatever. Here's the fun part that you need to keep in mind. The NCAA has started winning stays on appeal. That's fun. The 10th Circuit has already stayed the nationwide Colorado injunction on August 21st. We've already talked about that on the show. Wednesday, the Tennessee Court of Appeals actually stayed another injunction covering 19 athletes, including Tennessee's Jalen Washington, Indiana's Sam Alexis, previously at Florida, AJ Storr, I can't remember where he's going now, and then others, obviously. Those players are once again considered ineligible while that appeal continues. That does not make Mark Mitchell ineligible. We have to point that out. It's a different lawsuit, different court, different order. But it does matter because it demonstrates something. Precedents being set. Winning in front of a trial judge is not the finish line for these players. The NCAA has repeatedly been willing to appeal these rulings and ask different courts to pause them. So Kentucky has two fights still. First fight is, can Mitchell maintain his fifth-year protection from the NCAA? And the second one, even if he can, which I hope he does, can the SEC shut up and stop this Missouri to Kentucky intraconference transfer rule bull? It's so ridiculous. So here are three outcomes that I've written down on my notes that I'm watching Monday. The best case scenario is that Edwards says his injunction reaches the SEC's actions. Mark Mitchell remains protected, and Kentucky has a much clean path towards playing him. Excuse me. The SEC and NCAA could appeal, but Kentucky effectively has won this round. The middle ground here, Edwards doesn't give the plaintiffs everything they want Monday, but litigation continues. Mitchell remains on Kentucky's roster while everybody waits for the next order. Still messy. And I got a theory here I'll get back to in a second. Worst case scenario is that Edwards says the SEC isn't covered and is free to enforce its intraconference transfer rule. Mitchell could theoretically still have a fifth-year eligibility while being unable to use it at Kentucky. He'd have to go elsewhere. CBS Sports reported in that scenario, another conference or potentially Missouri could become an option. Of course, all these different conferences, even ones at the mid-major levels, are cracking down on this stuff as we speak. So maybe he doesn't. And then separately, there is always the possibility that the NCAA gets Edwards' underlying fifth-year protection stayed on appeal. Mark Mitchell's not ineligible today. We need to make that clear. I think that's really important to point out today, August 27th. He is still protected by Brian Edwards' order. His professional participation isn't currently what's keeping him from playing at Kentucky. The new fight is whether the SEC can enforce an intraconference transfer rule against somebody who couldn't have possibly known that he needed to use it in the April portal window. Excuse me. My stance, I need to make clear, is pretty simple. Kentucky shouldn't fight that. Mark Mitchell should fight that because I think they're right. Kentucky shouldn't fight it in the courtroom before Mark Pope fights it by putting Mitchell in a uniform. We're going to learn a whole lot about what's going on Monday morning. I hope they don't push this back, but here's my theory. The NCAA and the SEC aren't interested in solving this right now. They're going to drag this out as long as they can. I'm marking it down today, August 27th. You're going to see the NCAA and SEC fight tooth and nail, not to win these cases right now, but to drag this out through the start of the season. That's the goal. As well, if we can't win these in the long run, let's make it the long run. Let's see if we can hold out and make sure that these players are ineligible to step onto the court as long as we possibly can. So if they can't do it during the season, then obviously they can't play and their eligibility would be exhausted anyway. Of course, that has its own problems next year in 2027. If they do find a way to drag this out through December or something like that, late November, if they miraculously get there, which I'm guessing they're going to do everything they can to, that leads you to another collection of lawsuits coming from these plaintiffs saying, well, now you've screwed us out of actually having the opportunity to play and actually getting to play on top of the compensation we deserve to get for playing these games at these universities. Now we're talking about irreparable harm that the NCAA and SEC have done, and that leads to a whole nother can of worms. But my guess is if the SEC can't figure out a way to win this quickly, they're going to drag this into the mud, and they're going to figure out whether or not they actually owe these players money in 2027. And if they do, goodness gracious, it's going to get real messy, and we're going to still be talking about this in March. We've got listener questions. Wouldn't Mitchell be covered from the transfer rule under the wording of the TRO? Hearts that says NCAA and its entities. Theoretically, so that's the question, Holio. I just saw that in the Discord. Theoretically, yes, but again, the SEC has gone out of its way to publicly say, or at least according to Matt Norlander of CBS Sports, that they're going to fight Mitchell on this, which is why we're getting that conversation with Judge Brian Edwards on Monday morning at 10:45. So theoretically, you're right. Theoretically. But we don't know for sure yet. Okay. I've got a couple of listener voicemails to get to. Actually, one of them regarding Mark Mitchell and his eligibility. Also, yes, Captain Crash, you've got plenty of reasons to be optimistic. We have plenty of reasons to be optimistic. It is just going to drag out as long as possible. Two listener questions to get to. One about the rotation and what Kentucky's 10-man rotation should look like once they actually get into the schedule. I've got a couple of things that I would shuffle around, but I do like what the listener had to say. And then we've got a question about professional players that are not from the United States. What happens with those kids right now? We'll get to all that here in just a minute. First, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at FanDuel. Baseball fans, Reds fans out there, I'm so sorry. If you think you know who's hitting a homer today, FanDuel is giving you a free chance to call your shot with daily dingers. It's easy to play, really easy to play. Just make your free pick for who you think will hit a home run during their game, and if you're right, you'll receive a profit boost to use on your next bet for a chance at extra winnings. Best of all, you can make free pick every single day throughout the MLB season because Daily Dingers is another fun way to stay engaged with everyday's games, whether you're following your favorite team day to day or keeping an eye on matchups across the league. Every game has someone capable of going deep. Every single game. And now you get the chance to make your prediction before the first pitch. So are you ready to play your game today? Well, you can do it and join all of the action at FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com to play Daily Dingers and make your free pick on who is hitting a homer. Play ball and swing for the fences on FanDuel, an official partner of the MLB. All right, wrapping up today's episode of the show. Thank you guys so much for watching. We are live on YouTube. A couple hundred of you here in the live chat. Thank you so much for tuning in on a Thursday evening. We've talked a lot about some litigation bull. I am so tired of it. Unfortunately, we're probably not getting a reprieve for this for at least another month, I would guess. Like, there's no way. There's no way this is over by the end of September. So strap in. Ladies and gentlemen, strap in. It's about to be ugly. And by the way, I just want to point this out. If it's not, it could be over by the end of September for Mark Mitchell. It's not going to be over for everybody. I guarantee it. I guarantee it. You're good. A lot of fight in court. And shout out to the lawyers who are just rolling in money right now because of this. Good on you. Tapping into every single emotional fan base and getting things riled up for these kids. Like, good on you for making the money, I suppose. I mean, they're doing their job, so whatever. Who cares? Anyway, We got 2 listener questions to get to here. One of which about professional players that are not from the United States. Here is Dominic again. 859-359-6362 is the number to dial.
Man, Dominic Ramsey out of Louisville, Kentucky. Big fan. Love your work. Was just listening to your last episode. Mark Mitchell's eligible now. It's awesome. But I just had a question. Can you explain how this doesn't affect like professionals coming from Europe or elsewhere? How, obviously they had, I'm sure, signed a contract over there. Is it only just NBA or G League, or does it affect, professionals coming from Europe to play? Like, for example, like Santos going to LSU. This doesn't affect him? Thanks.
Dominic's question is really good. First of all, thank you so much for calling in. I'm really happy that we have the hotline now for you guys to like ask questions, because this is not me talking off into the ether. This is me trying to have a conversation with other fans. So I'm really, really happy that you guys are calling in. This is a really good question, because the word professional here is making this more confusing than it needs to be. Yes, as the SEC policy is currently written, it specifically targets the NFL, pro football leagues, the NBA, G League, and WNBA ecosystem, if that's what you want to call it. It does not say that signing a professional basketball contract in Europe automatically bars you from playing in the SEC. The actual SEC language says a school can't roster someone who declared for the NFL, NBA, WNBA draft and failed to properly withdraw, signed with the NFL or another pro football league, NBA, G League team, or a WNBA affiliate, or appeared on one of those rosters. So that's why a European player and somebody like RJ Lewis or an NFL returnee are treated differently under this specific SEC policy. Dominic mentioned Marcio Santos, somebody that Kentucky was linked to for a cup of coffee. Marcio Santos at LSU. I think he's a perfect example because he's been a legitimate professional basketball player. He played for Maccabi Tel Aviv in the EuroLeague last season, appeared in 37 EuroLeague games, and has been playing professionally overseas for years. But Maccabi Tel Aviv isn't the NBA or G League. So this new SEC rule does not independently prohibit LSU from rostering Santos simply because he played professionally in Europe. And Kentucky actually has its own example. Ousmane Ndiaye played professionally in Italy. Kentucky officially signed him after he averaged almost 10 points and 7 rebounds for Vanoli, I think, Cremona in Italy's top division. But very important distinction, does not mean Marcio Santos has been cleared to play. These are 2 separate questions here. Question 1, does the SEC new professional athlete rule ban him? Apparently not, based on their verbiage. I'm sure that with further clarification for Craig Pinkerton, the head of comms there at the SEC, I'm sure that we could get an answer out of him. If somebody wanted to reach out, I may reach out. Question 2 here, does he satisfy NCAA eligibility requirements? Right? That's still a separate NCAA determination. As of August 27th, reporting says it's still unclear how many of LSU's international additions, including Santos, will ultimately be ruled eligible, because the NCAA still evaluates an international prospect's pre-college professional history. So FIBA's updated NCAA guide explains that the Eligibility Center looks at things like contracts, compensation, professional competition individually. Prior professional experience doesn't automatically make somebody ineligible here, but salary, contract arrangements can absolutely create eligibility problems. So professional, quote unquote, isn't one universal NCAA category anymore. So you can have Mark Mitchell, played 4 years of college, went towards the NBA, played summer league, but apparently never signed a contract, then regained college eligibility. You can have RJ Lewis, who finished college, signed NBA G League deals, went professional, then tried to come back. And then Santos, who never played NCAA basketball, developed and played professionally overseas, and is trying to enter college for the first time. 3 completely different eligibility paths. And the new SEC rule is basically aimed at the second category here. Plus players who sign with the American Pro Leagues, it explicitly names. This is something, the question here I think is really good, because it actually exposes something a little strange about Sankey's new policy, because if you're making a philosophical argument that once you're a professional basketball player, you shouldn't be playing college ball, that's cool. Then explain Marcio Santos. Then the verbiage that the SEC put out is not adequate enough to describe the eligibility whether or not these kids from international leagues are eligible. Because again, he's played EuroLeague basketball. He played for Maccabi freaking Tel Aviv, guys. That's considerably higher level professional basketball than some guy signing an Exhibit 10 contract and then getting cut. That's way worse, in my opinion, because he's actually gone out and played dozens of games professionally, like at the highest level overseas. One of the highest levels, I should say. Yet the SEC's policy, again, specifically draws the line around, one more time, NBA G League, WNBA ecosystem, while leaving overseas basketball outside of it, at least in the wording. So to me, this is not it's not a philosophical rule about professionals playing college sports. It's a rules about athletes leaving college for American professional sports leagues and then coming back. So that distinction matters, in my opinion. So short here is, yes, the SEC's new rule specifically names the American leagues I listed. On the basketball side, it doesn't list European professional leagues. On its surface, they should be fine. Playing professionally overseas doesn't automatically trigger the SEC ban. But Santos also still has to get through the NCAA's separate eligibility process. And as of today, his competition eligibility is not something I would call officially settled. I don't think it's all messy. That's the best answer I can give. I'm not a lawyer. I'm sorry. That's the best I can do. And obviously, again, thank you for calling, Dominic. He mentioned professional European players. Kentucky's got one of those in Usman and Jai. And he's a factor here in our second voicemail, actually, because we apparently need to figure out how Mark Pope is going to get 47 different basketball players onto the floor this season. This is a really good voicemail here. Did not mention their name, but a caller from Minnesota. Here is voicemail number 2.
Hey, so I'm a big Kentucky fan. I'm from Minnesota, but I just saw your podcast on Mark Mitchell, and I was wondering, like, what your thoughts on, like, the roster would be, like, who would get minutes and who wasn't, because I'm sure that
Actual basketball.
Pope is obviously not going to go over 10 guys. And to me, I personally thought, like, the starters are obviously going to be Zoom Diallo, Alex Wilkins. At 3, Milan Momcilovic. 4 is obviously going to be Mark Mitchell. And then 5, obviously Malachi Moreno. And personally, I thought bench would be Justin McBride, Usman. Who else? Mason Williams, because he's worked his butt off all summer, so I feel like he's going to be there.
True.
Braden Hawthorne for sure. He had a big year. And then I really think the last one's going to be Cam Williams. Right, those are my 10, but then that means that we leave Jerron Morton out, which he's a senior, and we paid good NIL for him.
He's got to play.
Trent Noah, but I feel like Trent's not as good as any of them. No way.
I'm there.
Frank Kepnang, and like we paid money for him too, 7-footer.
He's got to play.
And then obviously Reese Potter is not going to play, and Zion Hawthorne. So I just wanted to know what you think the 10 guys are going to be playing, and then what is are going to be jipped out. But thank you.
So I made a comment on yesterday's show, if I'm not mistaken, that like Kentucky's going to have to shorten their rotation down. Like not everybody's going to play. So this is a really fun question, and thank you so much for calling. Wish I got your name there in the voicemail. I'll say this. We'll start with the starting 5. I agree with the starting 5. Diallo, Wilkins, Mitchell, Momcilovic, Moreno. You can lock that in for me. I don't particularly care whether or not we're calling Milan the small forward and Mitchell the power forward there, because I think it's nominal. They're both forwards. It doesn't matter. Milan is going to stretch the living hell out of the floor, and then Mitchell's going to operate all over it. He's going to attack downhill. Both those two guys are going to be really fun together. Defensively, assignments will dictate who technically plays the position. But those 5 are clearly ahead for me. That's the starting 5. I think that he said Cam Williams last. I would put Cam as the 6th man. I think he's the first man off the bench, which we both agree he's going to play. Absolutely playing. Easiest bench decision for me. at 6'7", 6'8". He's already played significant basketball for Kentucky. The analytics love him. Mark Pope raves about him. And a question that I asked earlier this offseason, Pope said he was ready to be a starter. That was before we got Momcilovic, obviously. We know the shooting can be really good. We know it can be good. It was stabilized towards the end of the year after he had come back from his broken foot. And then obviously he had hit 8 threes against Bellarmine last season. Still averaged 6 points per game despite a broken foot. And even after coming back from the broken foot, he was still a valuable player on the floor. He does not need the ball. That is incredibly valuable on this roster. You've already got Mitchell, Diallo, Wilkins creating, and then Moreno is another hub as well. Sometimes Mark Pope just needs a guy to run to the corner. You need a PJ Tucker on your team, and you need him to punish you for overhelping. Cam can absolutely do that. He's got a role. I would say that Justin McBride is somebody that I would throw off the bench as well. 7th, 8th guy here, 15 points per game, 5.5 boards, shooting 40% from 3 at James Madison. That doesn't just happen. I think that he would be a good rotational player here. Mitchell actually makes McBride's role easier. Before Mitchell, we were sitting here wondering whether or not Kentucky would need McBride or Ousmane Ndiaye to create a little bit more offense. Wasn't exactly sure if they'd be able to step in and comfortably do that day one. And now you can come in, you can be physical, you can be a better rebounder, I think, at his size, space the floor, attack a mismatch. He's a pretty decent ball handler as well, at least he was during his time at JMU. You can give Milan or Mitchell a little bit of a breather, and it's a 255-pound guy taking the floor, so have fun with that. You don't need 15 points per game from him. You probably need 12 to 18 minutes per night from him, depending on the matchup. I would play Frank Kepnong. He'd be my 8th guy off the bench. This is where I would take a little bit of a different direction than the caller. Also, we are 41 minutes into this. It's a long episode, guys. Woo! Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe if you haven't. I don't see how Frank Kepnong does not play because of what he adds to this defense. 6 points, 6 boards, 2.1 blocks per game in the Big Ten.
Dang.
He was 3rd in the league in blocks last season, and he was hurt for a portion of the season. He's 7 feet tall, 275 freaking pounds. You need physicality out there. So you're playing. Oh, by the way, pause real quick. Are any of you guys getting Tinder ads on the show if you're watching this? Like, are there anywhere on YouTube? Raise your hand in the comments if you are. You're playing Auburn, you're playing Florida, you're playing Tennessee, you're playing giant physical SEC forwards or front courts, I guess I should say. Moreno isn't playing 40 minutes a night. So Kepnong's got to be your backup 5. He's the best option for you. He's the best rim protector you have on this team, and he's really athletic. He may only play 10 to 12 minutes some nights. There's going to be games where Pope goes smaller and McBride or Mitchell absorb more front court minutes. Over the course of the season, though, Kepnong has to be in your rotation. Like, absolutely has to be in your rotation. Speaking of another guy in the rotation, Jerome Morton. I think he's got to be here. This is the other guy that the listener left out that I'm going to put in. It has everything to do with what he does here. Morton started 29 games at Wazoo, shot 39% from 3, 2.5 assists. He's played 92 college games. 92. That is that is exactly what you want out of your 9th man. Efficient shooter, little bit of a playmaker at the 2 guard, physical build there that could play the 3. Technically, he did at Morehead State a little bit, did at Wazoo at times. Fantastic 9th man, experienced, veteran, willing to defend, high energy. You need another ball handler, you play Jerome Morton. If you need a little bit more shooting, you play Jerome Morton. If you need somebody who won't lose his mind on the road against Tennessee, play him 18 minutes against the Vols. Senior guard who's played 92 games. He knows how this goes, and he's played really well against good competition. There is value in Jerome Morton in a 10-man rotation when things start to tighten up come February. Importantly, you don't have to play Mason Williams just because you need a backup point guard. Mason will garner early minutes because of his potential. I've already said that on the show. I think he's going to play this year. But Wilkins create, Mitchell can initiate, Morton can handle it. Zoom obviously doesn't have to leave the floor. Suddenly hand the entire offense to a freshman. My 10th man in this rotation, I think it's going to depend on the night. I think this is going to depend on the matchup. You could go Braden Hawthorne, Ousmane Ndiaye, Mason Williams. Here's your swing spot for the 10th guy. I think it's really tough for me because right now we don't, until we see these guys play, I can't give a definitive for this. If the developmental jump is real, If Hawthorne has gained some weight and gotten a little bit better this offseason, Braden would get this for me. Top 35 recruit coming out of high school, redshirted last season. Another 6'8" athlete on the wing that if he is legitimate as a defender, if he's defending at a high level, he gives you something different. Length, athleticism, switchability. He gives you potential and upside. Same for Njai, but still, I mean, this is a guy that's already been on your roster for a year. It's very easy to manufacture about 8 minutes a game for him. It's either him or Mason Williams for me because of the summer he's had. I'm a big believer in Mason. Again, you can also throw Njai in there as well. You could swap him out with McBride if you would like to. It's tough to find minutes for all these guys. But come February, my 10 would probably be Diallo, Wilkins, Mitchell, Momcilovic, Moreno. And then your bench is going to be Cam, McBride, Kepnong, Morton. And then depending on the night, it's going to be Njai, Hawthorne, or Mason Williams. I think Trent, Potter, and Zion sit on the bench. 11 through 13 here. They're not bad basketball players, and that's the crazy thing about this roster, right? And the thing about Njai, I'll say this real quick. 10 points and 7 rebounds in Italy's top league. Why is he not playing here? Because of the minutes that other guys at the 4 and the 5 are going to take from him. Mark Mitchell, Milan Momcilovic, Malachi Moreno, Justin McBride, Frank Kepnong, and potentially Braden Hawthorne, depending on how you want to run rotations. That's really brutal for Njai. He could absolutely beat somebody out. More often than not, reports have sort of indicated that he's just sort of not playing poorly, but he's not, how do I say this? He's not a standout guy in practice. There's a cleaner defined role for Kepnong and McBride in this team, and I really like Mason as well. Pope has raved about him. He's got a chance to be special. His high school numbers were nuts during the EYBL Scholastic League. Haven't talked about him in a minute. 15 points, 5 assists, 41% from 3, and played really well against some really tough high school comp. But he's still a freshman guard who plays in a backcourt with Diallo, Wilkins, and Morton. Plus Mitchell, who handles the basketball. He worked hard in July. Yeah, that's not the reason to play him. Everybody on Kentucky's roster worked hard in July. You gotta play the guys that give you the best chance to beat the best teams on your schedule. And I think Mason's going to be a good player. 2026, 2027 is not the year he plays 18 minutes a night. Maybe he works his way into the rotation. Maybe I'm wrong on that. And also, something I want to say here real quick as we wrap up is that once the season starts with the NIL and stuff, once the season starts, you have to forget the money. I'm serious. You have to forget how much you paid these players. It does not matter. The NIL allocation is a sunk cost, right? If Kentucky gave somebody significant money in May, and in January, mid-January on the road, he's the 11th best player on the team. Congratulations, you put together a really good freaking roster. You don't play a worse player because you're trying to justify what you paid him 6 months ago. Can't do it. The entire point of having this much depth is competition to find out what works the best. In early November, you're going to get 11 or 12 guys. Pope's got to figure that out. It's going to be rough. By SEC play, you're probably going to get 9.5, again, like I mentioned earlier. And by March, you could really tighten this thing down to an 8.5-man rotation with 2 situational guys. Something roughly like, as I've written down, Diallo, 28 to 32 minutes. Mitchell, 28 to 32. Milan, 27 to 31. Wilkins, 26 to 30. And then Moreno, 23 to 27. Cam gets real wing minutes. McBride gets real forward minutes. Kepnong backs up Moreno. And Morton and Braden and Williams battle for whatever is left. The luxury and the good thing here is that Kentucky doesn't have to decide anything today. That's what practice is for. If Mason is unbelievable, whenever in November rolls around, play Mason. If Njai is just simply too talented to sit, then you play Njai. If Braden Hawthorne's really taking the next step and he's jumping off and he's playing defending at a very high level, you give him minutes. If Kepnong struggles against smaller teams, you don't use him that night. Play Moreno, play Potter, play Njai. Who's quicker? That's what depth is supposed to look like. I agree with the caller from Minnesota on the starting 5. Thank you so much for calling. I'm going to change 2 players off his bench. Give me Kepnong and Morton over Mason Williams and Usman Njai today, but they're a part of the 11-12-man rotation. And frankly, if Mark Pope's biggest problem this winter is trying to figure out which legitimately good basketball player is the 11th or 12th best player in this rotation will survive. Kentucky fans are going to survive. We're going to be all right. So that's going to do it for today's episode of the show. A 50-minute, just insane show. Thank you guys so much for watching. Holy cow. Subscribe, please. Hopefully I didn't lose you guys there, wherever you are tuned in. You can follow the show on Twitter at LockedOnUK. Follow me on Twitter at @LanceDawe_. Follow the show over on Instagram at Kentucky Podcast. You can also follow me on Instagram at LanceDawe_ as well. That is not my outro. Any questions, comments, concerns, you can leave those in the YouTube comments below. Hit me on the socials. I will see you all tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Kentucky. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day. And God bless.